The world had changed overnight. What was once a thriving nation full of hope and promise had now descended into a decimated wasteland. Cities lay in ruin, their streets overrun with the dead, once human beings turned into mindless, ravenous creatures. The apocalypse had arrived, and the undead walked the earth. It wasn't just an ordinary virus outbreak or some rogue pathogen, this was the end of everything as humanity had known it. In a small, isolated town on the outskirts of what had once been a bustling metropolis, a group of survivors banded together, hoping to find safety and strength in numbers. They had heard rumors of a sanctuary, a place that might still be untouched by the horrors of the zombie outbreak. But the path to survival would not be easy. Not only would they need to outsmart the ever-present horde of undead, but they also had to battle the growing tension among themselves. Trust was a commodity as scarce as food and water. Every decision could lead to life or death. Among the survivors was Sarah, a former military officer who had managed to keep a calm head in the chaos. She was determined to lead the group, having seen the worst of the outbreak firsthand. She carried the weight of leadership like an anchor, but the pressure was starting to take its toll. Her once pristine uniform was tattered, and her eyes, though sharp, were filled with the weight of too many hard choices. She had seen friends fall and families torn apart in this new world. The undead were not the only threat. Human nature, twisted by fear and desperation, was just as dangerous. Joining Sarah was Ethan, a resourceful mechanic with a knack for making things work, even when the odds were stacked against him. He had been a loner before the outbreak, not used to relying on anyone. But as the days dragged on, he found himself growing fond of the survivors he had come to depend on. His ingenuity with weapons and tools made him an invaluable asset to the group, but his growing attachment to the others was something he struggled to comprehend. He couldn't afford to get too close to anyone, not in a world where survival came before everything else. Then there was Claire, a young woman who had lost everything in the early days of the outbreak. She was quiet but strong, her grief buried beneath layers of determination. She had no military experience, no skills to fall back on, but what she lacked in training, she made up for in courage. As the youngest member of the group, Claire was often the most optimistic, clinging to the hope that humanity could still find a way to rebuild. The final member of the group was Alex, a former paramedic with a sharp mind and steady hands. He had once saved lives, but now he found himself in a world where death was the constant companion. He had grown numb to the loss, focusing instead on keeping the survivors alive. But as the days passed, Alex found it harder to keep his emotions in check. Every time he treated an injury or helped someone escape a close call, he couldn't help but wonder how long it would be before he ran out of hope himself. Together, this unlikely group of survivors had found refuge in a dilapidated warehouse, nestled on the edge of a town that was slowly being consumed by the undead. For now, the Horde had not discovered their hideout, but it was only a matter of time before they did. The undead seemed to roam aimlessly, drawn to the faintest sounds, the smallest movements. They were relentless, their hunger never sated. Every day felt like a battle for survival, as they scavenged for supplies and fortified their makeshift home. As Sarah, Ethan, Claire, and Alex sat around a campfire one evening, their minds raced with plans for the future. They had to get out of the town. The undead were closing in, and the warehouse was no longer a safe haven. But where could they go? The rumors of a sanctuary seemed like the only glimmer of hope. It was located to the north, but the journey was dangerous. They would have to navigate through the heart of the Undead Horde, a trek that would require every ounce of courage and resourcefulness they had left. "There's no way we can stay here much longer," Sarah said, her voice low but firm. "The undead are getting closer every day. We need to move." Ethan looked up from the fire, his expression dark. "And head where? To the so-called sanctuary? We don't even know if it exists. For all we know, it's just a rumor." Claire shifted uncomfortably, her fingers twitching as she played with the edge of her torn sleeve. "But we have to try. Staying here means death. If we go, maybe there's a chance for us. Maybe we can rebuild." Alex nodded in agreement. "She's right. We can't stay here. We're running out of food, water, and ammunition. If we want to survive, we have to take that risk. The tension was palpable as the group exchanged glances. They had no other choice. The undead would eventually find them, and without a plan, they wouldn't last much longer. The unknown sanctuary to the north was their only hope, even if it was just a faint possibility. As the fire crackled and the night grew darker, the survivors knew one thing for certain: the journey ahead would be the ultimate test of their will to live. And as they prepared to face the undead, they would also have to confront their deepest fears, their trust in one another, and the unrelenting horrors that had become their new reality. The morning light filtered through the cracks in the warehouse's walls, casting long shadows across the floor. The air inside was thick with tension as Sarah, Ethan, Claire, and Alex gathered around their makeshift map, a collection of torn, weathered sheets of paper with scrawled notes and crude drawings of the surrounding area. The path to the rumored sanctuary was fraught with danger, and they knew it was only a matter of time before they encountered the undead on their journey. Sarah stood tall, pointing to a location on the map. "This is the main road we'll need to take. It's the fastest route, but it's also the most heavily trafficked by the undead. We'll need to be quick and careful." Ethan leaned over the map, studying it with furrowed brows. "We can't just rush in. We need a strategy. We're not just dealing with zombies out there. There are other people too, and they'll be just as desperate as we are." Claire shifted uneasily, glancing out the broken windows at the empty streets outside. "How are we even supposed to know if we're headed in the right direction? What if we get lost? What if the sanctuary isn't real?" Alex gave her a reassuring look. "We have to keep moving forward. We can't let doubt stop us now. If the sanctuary's real, it's our best shot. And if it's not, well, we'll figure it out as we go." The group fell silent, each person lost in their own thoughts. The world outside was a shattered version of the one they had known, and every step they took would bring them closer to an uncertain future. Ethan was the first to break the silence. "We'll need to gather what supplies we can before we leave. I'll head out to check the nearby stores for anything useful. We can't afford to leave empty-handed." Sarah nodded, making mental notes of the resources they would need. "We need food, water, and anything that can help with defense, batteries, medical supplies, tools. I'll work on reinforcing our weapons while you're out there." Claire, always the one to offer a solution, added, "I'll gather any maps or information we can use. Maybe there's something we missed. Anything to give us an edge." Alex stood up, stretching his limbs. "I'll make sure the perimeter is secure. If we're going to leave, we need to make sure we're not followed." The survivors moved with purpose, each one knowing the gravity of the task at hand. They had no idea what awaited them on the road, but the urgency of the situation drove them to action. The warehouse had been their home for weeks, a temporary refuge in a world that no longer made sense. But now, it was a prison, and escape was the only option. Ethan returned a few hours later, his arms laden with bags filled with supplies. He handed them over to Sarah, who quickly began distributing the goods. There was enough food and water to last a few days, a handful of batteries, and a few spare medical supplies, but there was nothing that could replace the loss they had suffered, nothing that could bring back what they had lost in this new world. "We have what we need for now," Sarah said, packing the last of the supplies into their bags. "It won't be enough if we run into trouble, but it's better than nothing." The group gathered their belongings, readying themselves for the journey ahead. As they walked toward the door, they took one last look at the warehouse that had been their sanctuary, a safe place that now felt more like a tomb. The undead were close, and their time in the warehouse had run out. With weapons in hand and determination in their eyes, the survivors set out, their footsteps echoing in the empty streets. The journey to the sanctuary was long and treacherous, but there was no turning back now. They were united by a single purpose: to survive. As they made their way through the abandoned town, the once familiar sights now felt foreign. The homes and businesses were eerily quiet, their windows shattered, doors hanging off their hinges. The air was thick with the scent of decay, a constant reminder of the devastation that had swept through the country. Every corner held the possibility of danger, and every shadow could conceal an undead predator. Sarah led the group, her sharp eyes scanning their surroundings for any signs of movement. She was focused, determined to keep everyone safe. But even her training couldn't eliminate the fear that gnawed at her. What if they weren't as prepared as they thought? What if they didn't make it? Ethan, ever the skeptic, kept his distance, his mind racing with concerns of his own. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low. "We don't know what we'll face out there. The undead are one thing, but there are other people out there too. Desperate people." "I know," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "We'll have to be careful. Trust is a luxury we don't have." As they walked deeper into the town, the sounds of their footsteps were drowned out by the faint, distant moans of the undead. The horde was out there, somewhere, waiting for any sign of life. The survivors knew that if they made even the smallest mistake, it could be their last. Their journey had only just begun, and the stakes had never been higher. There was no room for hesitation, no time for doubt. The horde was closing in, and the survivors had to unite, push through their fears, and face the battle ahead. The fate of humanity hung in the balance, and their struggle for survival was far from over. The survivors trekked through the desolate streets, the weight of their supplies pulling them down. Every step felt heavier as they navigated through the wreckage of their world. The road ahead was uncertain, but the ever-present fear of the undead pushed them forward. The deeper they ventured into the town, the more unsettling the silence became. The streets, once full of life, were now eerily quiet, with only the occasional groan of the undead carried on the wind. Sarah's eyes never stopped scanning the area. She had seen too many groups of survivors get careless, too many fall into traps set by the very people they thought they could trust. The thought that someone, living or dead, might be watching them was always at the back of her mind. She knew that the further they went, the greater the risk of encountering others, desperate, scavenging groups who would do anything to survive, even if it meant taking what wasn't theirs. Ethan, walking just a few paces behind Sarah, kept his hand tightly gripping the makeshift weapon he had cobbled together. He had always been a lone wolf, and the idea of relying on others, of depending on them, was still foreign to him. Every so often, he'd glance over at Claire, who had been unusually quiet, her eyes focused on the path ahead. Claire, though brave, struggled with the harsh realities of the world they now lived in. The memory of her family, lost to the very thing they were trying to escape, lingered in her mind. It was difficult to silence the pain that followed her every step, but she pushed it down, focusing on the present. On survival. "Keep your eyes open," Sarah's voice broke through the silence. "We're getting closer to the old shopping district. It's one of the areas with the highest undead activity." Alex, walking at the rear, checked their perimeter once again. His keen sense of hearing picked up the faintest sounds in the distance, something that wasn't a mere wind blowing through broken windows or the occasional distant groan. "We're not alone," he murmured. His voice was steady, but his eyes narrowed as he scanned the area. The others froze, instinctively reaching for their weapons. The tension was palpable. For a few long moments, nothing moved. Then, through the haze of dust and debris, they spotted a figure up ahead, a lone person, crouched low, moving with deliberate caution. It wasn't a zombie. "Who's that?" Claire whispered, her hand shaking slightly as she gripped her knife tighter. Sarah motioned for them to stay put and moved closer, her footsteps soft but swift. She didn't want to alert whoever it was just yet. As she got closer, the figure turned, and she saw a man, thin and ragged, his clothes torn, his face gaunt from weeks of surviving in this hellish world. "Hey!" Sarah called out, her voice firm but not hostile. "Are you alone?" The man tensed, looking over his shoulder as though debating whether to run or face them. After a long moment of silence, he straightened up, slowly lowering his hands. His eyes, dark and haunted, locked onto Sarah's, and he took a hesitant step forward. "I'm not looking for trouble," he said, his voice hoarse, as if he hadn't spoken in days. "I'm just trying to make it. I'm trying to reach the north too." Sarah eyed him carefully, her hand still on her weapon. She couldn't afford to trust anyone easily, not with the stakes so high. But there was something about him, He didn't seem like the usual scavenger, the desperate soul willing to turn violent at the drop of a hat. He looked tired, like someone who had seen too much and was just trying to survive, same as them. "How do we know we can trust you?" Ethan's voice was skeptical, his eyes scanning the man for any sign of deception. He was never one to trust strangers easily, especially in a world like this. The man sighed deeply, rubbing his face with his hands. "I'm not a threat. I've seen what's out there. I don't have much left, but I've got a map, one that might actually lead to something. I've been following it for days. I think I'm on the right track, but it's hard to know." Claire, still cautious, glanced at Sarah. "What if he's lying? What if he's just trying to get us to trust him, and then he leads us into a trap?" "We'll find out soon enough," Sarah said, her gaze still fixed on the stranger. "I'm not letting anyone put the group in danger. But if he's telling the truth, then maybe he's a valuable ally. If he's lying, we deal with it." The man nodded, not arguing. "I know what it looks like. I'm not asking for your trust. I'm just offering what I've got. The map's not perfect, but it might get us closer to the sanctuary. It's better than wandering blind." Alex stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied the man. "How do we know you're not leading us into the middle of a horde?" "I'm not. I've been trying to avoid the bigger groups, staying off the main roads. That's the only way to make it through," the man explained, his voice growing more earnest. "I've been out here too long to make mistakes now." Sarah nodded slowly, her instincts still on high alert, but the idea of an additional resource, especially someone who knew the area, wasn't something she could dismiss. She glanced back at the group. Ethan's face was unreadable, but Claire seemed less wary, her curiosity starting to override her doubts. "We'll take you with us," Sarah said, after a moment's pause. "But we're sticking to the plan. No one deviates without consulting the group." The man nodded, a flicker of gratitude crossing his face, but it was quickly replaced with the hardened look of someone who had been through too much to show weakness. "Understood." The survivors, now 4 instead of 3, continued their journey forward, with the new stranger in tow. The streets felt even more oppressive now, with the weight of uncertainty hanging over them. They had been cautious, always alert to every sound, every movement. But now, there was something else they had to guard against, the possibility that this new ally could be just as dangerous as the undead themselves. As they ventured deeper into the town, the group couldn't shake the feeling that the path ahead was full of even greater dangers than they had anticipated. And as the sky began to darken, they knew that the real test of their survival had only just begun. The group moved cautiously through the crumbling remains of the city. Their footsteps were soft but purposeful, barely making a sound as they weaved through abandoned cars and shattered storefronts. Despite their best efforts to stay under the radar, a sense of impending danger hung in the air like a thick fog. The further they traveled, the more unsettling the silence became. It was the kind of quiet that made you wonder what was lurking just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Sarah's eyes were sharp, scanning every shadow, every corner, every movement. Her mind was racing, calculating the risks, weighing the odds. Their new companion, the stranger, had been relatively silent since he joined them, his hands resting loosely at his sides as if he were just another survivor trying to make it through the day. But Sarah wasn't fooled. People didn't survive this long in the apocalypse without a certain level of caution, and sometimes, that caution meant lying, deceiving, or manipulating to stay alive. Ethan, always the skeptic, had made his distrust clear from the start. His gaze never fully left the stranger, and more than once, he had stopped mid-step to check their surroundings, his hand lingering near the handle of his weapon. Claire, though still quiet, seemed less tense. She had a kind heart, and part of her wanted to believe the stranger was telling the truth. After all, they had all been in the same position, fighting just to stay alive, searching for anything that could offer hope. But Alex was the most unflinching. He didn't trust anyone easily, but he knew the harsh realities of this new world better than anyone. The more people they encountered, the more likely it was that one of them would turn on the group. He kept his eyes on the road ahead, his thoughts consumed by the dangers they might encounter. As they approached a large, dilapidated building that used to be a convenience store, the stranger spoke up. "We should check inside," he suggested, his voice low, almost cautious. "It's not much, but it's as good a place as any to rest and resupply." Sarah glanced at him. "Any particular reason you want to stop here?" The stranger hesitated, then met her gaze. "There's something you should know. I've been here before." A group of scavengers set up camp inside. "They're armed and dangerous." Ethan stiffened. "Great. Just what we need, more people trying to kill us." The stranger didn't argue. "I'm just warning you. They won't hesitate if they see us as a threat." Sarah nodded slowly, her mind calculating the situation. They couldn't afford to engage with another hostile group, especially with the Undead Horde closing in. They needed to keep moving, but their resources were dwindling. The supplies inside could make the difference between life and death. "We'll go in," she said firmly. "But we'll be ready for anything. We don't know if they'll be hostile or not." The group approached the store cautiously, their steps deliberate, their weapons at the ready. The building loomed ahead, its broken windows like vacant eyes staring out at them. The door was slightly ajar, but it was impossible to see what lay inside. Sarah made a quick motion, signaling for everyone to stay behind her. She nudged the door open with the barrel of her gun, peering into the dark interior. The shelves were knocked over, empty bottles and cans scattered across the floor. But the air was thick with the smell of stale food, a sharp reminder that the world had changed irrevocably. The occasional scraping sound echoed through the store. Could it be a zombie? Or worse, another survivor trying to move silently? Sarah motioned for the others to follow as she stepped inside, her gun held steady in front of her. Ethan and Claire moved behind her, with Alex covering the rear. The store was eerily quiet, but Sarah could feel the tension building in the air. Something wasn't right. Suddenly, a low voice cut through the silence. "I wouldn't come any closer if I were you." The group froze. The voice had come from the back of the store. There, crouched behind a shelf, was a man, his face half concealed by a hood. A rifle was slung over his shoulder, and his eyes were hard, wary. He was definitely not a friend. "Stay where you are," the man continued, his tone flat, but the edge in his voice was unmistakable. "I don't want trouble. But I'm not afraid to make some." Ethan stepped forward, his stance aggressive. "What do you want from us?" The stranger's gaze flickered over the group. He sized them up quickly, his eyes lingering on Sarah. "Food, medicine, whatever you've got. And if you're willing to work for it, maybe we can help each other. But you're not taking anything without a trade." Sarah's mind raced. She hadn't expected to find another group this close. It was too much of a coincidence. Something about the man's tone set her off, like he knew more than he was letting on. He didn't seem like the typical scavenger, they weren't so quick to negotiate. Most of them wanted to take what they could and run. "Why should we trust you?" Claire spoke up, her voice shaky but determined. "How do we know you're not just going to kill us and take everything we have?" The man's lips curled into a thin smile. "You don't. But you don't have much of a choice. I'm in charge here. And if you want to live, you'll play by my rules." Sarah took a deep breath, trying to maintain her composure. This was what they had feared, the possibility of running into more hostile groups. But they couldn't afford to get into a firefight, not with so little ammunition, and certainly not with the undead out there. "We're not here to fight," Sarah said, her voice steady but firm. "We need supplies, and we're willing to trade. But if you want to fight, we'll leave and take our chances outside." The man studied her for a long moment, then slowly lowered his rifle. "Fine. But don't think I'm doing this because I trust you. You're still on my turf, and I'll be watching." With that, the tension in the room eased, just a little. The man stepped back, motioning for the group to follow him deeper into the store. Sarah kept her eyes on him, but she knew they had little choice but to accept his offer. In this world, survival often meant making deals with people you didn't trust. As the group moved cautiously into the depths of the store, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far worse. They had just made a deal with someone who had the power to turn their world upside down, and she knew that whatever happened next would be a test of their unity, their strength, and their will to survive. The ultimate battle against the undead was one thing, but the fight against other survivors? That was the real danger. The deeper they ventured into the store, the more Sarah felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Their uneasy truce with the man, who had introduced himself as Jack, was fragile at best. He moved ahead of them, his rifle still slung casually over his shoulder, but Sarah noticed the way he kept one hand near the barrel, ready to grab it at a moment's notice. It was clear he didn't trust them either. The tension in the air was palpable, but there was little choice. Their dwindling supplies had forced them to take the risk. The interior of the store was a maze of overturned shelves and debris. Broken glass crunched underfoot, adding to the ominous atmosphere. The shelves were mostly bare, with a few cans of food scattered here and there. A musty, stale smell lingered in the air, mixing with the ever-present scent of decay. As they walked deeper into the store, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There were too many signs of abandonment, too many things out of place. "Watch your step," Jack muttered, glancing over his shoulder. "I've cleared the undead from here, but you never know." Ethan shot him a look. "You mean, you cleared them? Or someone else?" Jack paused, his gaze flicking around the store as if he were debating whether to give them an honest answer. Finally, he shrugged. "Does it matter? They're gone for now." Sarah could see Ethan's skepticism in his narrowed eyes, but he said nothing. They couldn't afford to alienate Jack completely, not yet. But Sarah could see the warning signs. The man was hiding something. She'd been in the world of survival long enough to recognize when people were playing games. He was no different. As they rounded a corner, they came into a larger room at the back of the store. There, among piles of discarded food containers and hastily packed bags, a small group of people sat huddled around a fire. The flame flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the room. At first, they seemed like ordinary survivors, dirty, tired, and weary, but Sarah's instincts told her they were anything but ordinary. "Everyone, meet the new guests," Jack called out, his voice a little too loud, as if he were trying to establish dominance over the group. A woman stood up from the fire, her eyes sharp and calculating. "Guests, huh? You brought strangers in here, Jack?" Jack didn't flinch. "They're not a threat. Yet." The woman looked the group over, her gaze lingering on Sarah. Her face was scarred, her hair matted with dirt and sweat. She had the look of someone who had been through too much to care about appearances or pleasantries. Her hand hovered near the knife at her belt, a gesture Sarah couldn't ignore. "You're lucky we're low on supplies," the woman said bluntly. "If we had more food, I'd tell you to turn around and leave. But we don't. So, sit." With a stiff nod, Sarah motioned for her group to take a seat by the fire, though she remained alert, her hand close to her own weapon. Claire and Alex sat down on the makeshift seats nearby, but Ethan stayed standing, his posture defensive. He didn't trust Jack or anyone else here, and he made no effort to hide it. The woman lowered herself back down to the fire, eyeing Sarah with interest. "You look like you've been surviving longer than most. What's your story?" Sarah took a deep breath, her mind carefully weighing her words. The last thing she wanted was to share too much, but survival in this world meant negotiating, and sometimes, that meant offering just enough information to keep someone from getting too curious. "We've been on the move for a while," she said carefully. "Trying to stay ahead of the horde. And, like everyone else, looking for a safe place. No luck so far." The woman snorted. "Safe place? There's no such thing anymore. If you're lucky, you'll find a patch of ground where the undead haven't found you yet. But that's all." Jack leaned against the wall, his gaze flicking between Sarah and the woman, who Sarah now realized must be the leader of this small group. "She's right, you know. You're better off sticking with us for now. We have a solid setup here, fortifications, food. It's not much, but it's better than what's out there. Sarah's mind was racing. She had no intention of staying here long. Trusting this group would be a mistake, and she was keenly aware of the danger of staying in one place for too long. But at the same time, they were running low on supplies, and the idea of staying for a night, or even a few hours, to rest and regroup was tempting. "We don't need to be here long," Sarah said, choosing her words carefully. "We just need to replenish our supplies and then we'll be on our way." Jack raised an eyebrow. "On your way? Where?" "North," Sarah replied. "We're heading towards the sanctuary. We've heard there might be something there." The room grew quiet. The mention of the sanctuary seemed to hold some weight. Sarah could feel the tension rise as everyone in the room exchanged looks. Even the fire crackled louder, as if to underline the heavy silence. The woman, who still hadn't introduced herself, leaned forward. "The sanctuary? You really think that's still a thing? I've heard stories about it, people saying it's a safe zone, a place where the undead don't roam. But I don't buy it. It sounds like a fairy tale." "It's not a fairy tale," Sarah said, her voice steady. "We've got a map that leads to it. We've seen signs that it's real." Jack chuckled darkly. "Good luck with that. The further north you go, the worse it gets. I've heard that the undead are worse up there, and if there's a sanctuary, it's probably overrun by now. People chasing a dream." Despite the doubt in Jack's words, Sarah knew there was more to this place than he was letting on. They weren't just worried about the undead, something about the way he spoke about the sanctuary made her think he knew more than he was willing to admit. "We'll take our chances," Sarah said firmly, ignoring the unease creeping up her spine. "But we need supplies. And we need them now." The woman stood up, brushing her hands off. "Fine. We've got some cans, some water. But we're not giving everything away. If you want something, you'll have to work for it." Sarah nodded, understanding the unspoken rule. "We'll trade." Ethan stepped forward, his voice low. "What exactly do you want in exchange?" The woman studied him for a moment before turning to Jack. "You know what I want. Get them to work. Maybe they'll find something useful." Jack smirked, and for the first time, Sarah saw a flash of something darker in his eyes. "You heard the lady. Get to work, and we'll talk supplies after." Reluctantly, Sarah nodded. It seemed like their only option: work for food, then leave. The uneasy feeling in her gut persisted, but she couldn't ignore the harsh reality of survival. Their best shot at continuing their journey to the sanctuary was to stay alive, and sometimes that meant doing things that felt wrong, things that made her question how much she could truly trust anyone in this broken world. The night stretched on, filled with uneasy silence and quiet whispers. Sarah couldn't help but feel like they were just one step away from a catastrophe, but she had no choice but to keep moving forward. The ultimate battle was not just with the undead, it was with the other survivors, those who had been twisted by this new world. And she had to be prepared for whatever came next. The following morning came too quickly. The soft glow of the rising sun barely cut through the grime-coated windows of the store, and the chill in the air was a reminder that they hadn't yet adapted to this world where comfort was a distant memory. The fire from the previous night had died down to a few embers, casting long shadows across the dusty floor. Sarah woke with a start, her body sore from the hard floor. She rubbed her eyes and quickly scanned the room. Claire and Alex were still asleep, their faces drawn with exhaustion. Ethan was already up, sitting against one of the shelves, his back straight and his eyes scanning the perimeter of the room. Jack's group, meanwhile, was stirring as well. The woman from last night, still unnamed, was rummaging through a pile of supplies, while Jack stood by the door, keeping watch. It wasn't long before the woman, whose name they still hadn't learned, motioned for Sarah to join her by the fire. Reluctantly, Sarah got up, making sure to check her pack for the few things she had left. Her stomach growled, but she ignored it, focusing instead on the task at hand, securing more supplies. "Here," the woman said, tossing Sarah a can of beans. "You'll want that. They'll hold you over for a while, but don't expect much else." Thanks, Sarah said quietly, though she didn't really feel any gratitude. The can was heavy with the weight of its contents, but in this world, food was worth more than gold. Her thoughts drifted to the sanctuary they were heading toward, if it even existed. Could it really be a place of hope, or was it just another fool's dream? Jack approached then, his boots clicking on the floor as he strode up to Sarah. He looked down at her for a moment, his eyes calculating. If you're serious about leaving soon, you'll need to make sure your group is ready. It's not safe outside, and if you're planning on heading north, you'll want to know what's out there. We'll manage, Ethan replied, stepping forward. There was an edge to his voice, and Sarah could tell that he was growing increasingly wary of Jack's attempts to control the situation. His eyes locked with Jack's, and there was a subtle tension in the air. They were sizing each other up, as men often did in a world where resources were limited and trust was a rare commodity. Jack, however, didn't back down. No, you won't. The roads north are crawling with the undead. You might have avoided them so far, but you won't be so lucky if you keep going unprepared. The woman glanced up, her eyes flicking between Jack and Sarah. Jack's right about that. If you're really going north, you'll want to take weapons. You'll want to be armed. The undead aren't the only danger out there. Sarah's stomach clenched. There was something in the woman's voice that hinted at more than just the usual survivor paranoia. The thought of facing both the undead and hostile humans was a grim prospect, but Sarah had little choice but to take what they were saying seriously. We've got what we need, Sarah said, forcing herself to sound confident. She patted the side of her pack, where her own weapons were secured. We'll be fine. Jack smirked. I'm not so sure. You can't afford to be overconfident out here. He turned on his heel and addressed his group. Gather your things. We're going out for a supply run. These people are getting a crash course in surviving out there. Sarah frowned but said nothing. She had no intention of tagging along for another run with Jack and his group, especially after what had transpired the night before. Her instincts told her that there was more to his group than they were letting on, but she needed to play her cards carefully. Every move had to be deliberate. As Jack and his group began to prepare for their trip, Sarah turned to Ethan. We need to stick to our plan. No matter what happens, we can't trust them. Ethan nodded grimly. I know. But we don't have much of a choice, do we? They spent the rest of the morning checking their gear, quietly preparing for whatever the day might bring. Sarah couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. They had to leave, soon. Every moment they spent with Jack and his group made her feel more uncomfortable. She didn't trust them, and she didn't trust the stories they were telling about the undead and the road north. Once the others were ready, Jack motioned for them to follow him. The streets outside were eerily quiet, and Sarah's grip tightened on her weapon as they walked through the deserted town. The buildings around them were in various stages of decay, their windows shattered and their doors hanging off their hinges. The group moved cautiously, the only sounds being the occasional creak of wood and the distant moan of an undead creature. The air was thick with the smell of rot and decay, a constant reminder of the world they now lived in. Sarah couldn't help but glance over her shoulder every few seconds, wary of anything, or anyone, that might be lurking. They reached a small convenience store, its windows boarded up, but the door had been forced open. Inside, the shelves were mostly empty, but there were still a few items left scattered about. Jack motioned for the group to stay quiet as they entered, his eyes scanning the room with military precision. Stay close, he whispered. And keep your heads down. We don't know what's inside. Sarah could hear the shuffle of footsteps in the distance, the unmistakable sound of undead approaching. The hair on the back of her neck stood up, and she tightened her grip on her weapon. The group moved deeper into the store, Sarah's heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the low groan of the undead getting closer. Jack signaled for everyone to take cover behind the aisles, his eyes darting between Sarah and the others. Ethan whispered harshly, "What do we do now?" Sarah's mind raced. The horde was closing in fast, and they were trapped inside with no clear escape route. She had to think quickly, her group depended on it. "We fight," Sarah said, her voice steady. We make our way to the back, and we take them down one by one. Jack's eyes flickered with approval, but Sarah could see a flicker of something else in his expression. Was it hesitation? Fear? It was hard to tell in the chaos of the moment. But one thing was clear, the battle was just beginning, and they were going to need everything they had to survive. The tension in the air was palpable. The groans of the undead grew louder, echoing from the far end of the store as the group huddled behind the rows of shelves. Every second felt like an eternity, each passing moment bringing them closer to an unavoidable clash. Sarah's heart raced as she slowly peered around the corner, her breath shallow. The undead were closing in on their position, their mindless shuffling reverberating in the quiet space like the ticking of a deadly clock. "They're almost here," Ethan whispered, his voice tinged with panic. He clutched his weapon tightly, his knuckles white, sweat beading on his forehead. Sarah gave him a quick glance. "Stay calm," she muttered. "We have the element of surprise." Jack, who had been standing silently, eyes scanning the room like a hawk, nodded sharply. "We take them out slowly. Don't make any noise. We don't want to alert the rest of them." But Sarah wasn't sure how long their cover would hold. The undead outside weren't the only threat they had to worry about. In this new world, people were just as dangerous, if not more so, than the monsters that roamed the earth. She had to be careful. They all did. The door creaked again, and the undead shuffled into the store, their ragged movements jerky and disjointed. There were at least a dozen of them, their decayed bodies stumbling aimlessly. Their glazed, lifeless eyes roamed over the shelves, not even noticing the survivors who were just a few feet away. Sarah glanced at her group. Ethan was still tense, Claire's face pale as she gripped her weapon, and Alex, who had proven to be useful in a fight, but still untested in a real battle, stood silently, his jaw clenched. Sarah wasn't sure how long they could keep it together, but she knew they didn't have much choice. One of the undead stumbled too close to a shelf, knocking over a can of food. The noise shattered the silence, and the creatures froze, their heads jerking toward the sound. A few began to shuffle in that direction, their mouths agape, groaning hungrily. "Now!" Sarah hissed, motioning for the group to move. In an instant, chaos erupted. The survivors sprang into action, moving fast and silently, using the shelves as cover. Jack was the first to strike, his knife cutting through the neck of the nearest undead with practiced precision. The creature's head fell, its body slumping to the floor in a heap. Ethan followed close behind, swinging his crowbar with force and landing a solid blow to one of the creature's skulls. It crumpled instantly, lifeless before it even hit the ground. Sarah didn't hesitate. She lunged forward, her makeshift weapon, a heavy metal pipe, connecting with the head of an undead that had come too close. The force of the blow sent it crashing to the floor, its skull caving in with a sickening sound. She quickly stepped back, scanning the room for any other threats. She couldn't afford to get distracted. In the chaos, Alex found himself cornered by two of the undead. His weapon, a small knife, wasn't nearly enough to handle the threat. He was backpedaling, fear clear in his wide eyes. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she watched him stumble, almost tripping over his own feet. Without thinking, she darted toward him, knocking the closest undead to the ground with a well-placed swing of her pipe. It fell with a guttural moan, but the second one was still coming at Alex, who seemed frozen in place. She pushed past him, slamming her elbow into the creature's chest. It stumbled back for a moment, but Sarah didn't wait to see if it recovered. She swung again, knocking it off balance, and with one last blow to the skull, it collapsed in a heap. Alex was breathing heavily, his face pale. "Thanks," he whispered, his voice shaking. Sarah nodded sharply. "Don't mention it. Keep your head in the game." The sound of shuffling feet echoed as more of the undead appeared from the back of the store. Their numbers were increasing. Sarah could feel her adrenaline spike. They couldn't keep fighting forever, and the horde was only getting bigger. She motioned for Jack to fall back. "We need to regroup," she shouted, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Head for the back of the store. We make our stand there." Jack's eyes flicked to the growing group of undead, then back to Sarah. He gave a quick nod and began motioning for his people to fall back. "Move," he barked. The survivors moved quickly, the pounding of their boots echoing in the empty store. They took cover behind a set of shelves at the back of the room, each one readying their weapons and preparing for the inevitable onslaught. Sarah's eyes scanned the group. "We're going to have to fight our way out," she said, her voice low and determined. "There's no other choice. Stay close, watch each other's backs." Ethan looked at her, his expression grim but resolute. "What's the plan, Sarah?" "We stick together," she replied. "We take them down one by one. If we can clear a path, we head for the exit. But we need to keep moving. No hesitation." The first wave of undead came at them, drawn by the sounds of their movement. The survivors were ready. Jack swung his axe in a wide arc, taking down 2 at once. Claire and Alex quickly followed, their knives flashing in the dim light as they struck with deadly precision. Ethan and Sarah took the flanks, making sure no one was left vulnerable. The horde was relentless, but so were they. Every swing, every strike, every movement was calculated. There was no time for mistakes. Sarah's hands were slick with sweat, and her muscles burned with fatigue, but she refused to stop. They couldn't stop. Not now. With each undead that fell, a small victory was won, but the noise was drawing more creatures in. They had only a few moments before the store would be completely overrun. "Get ready!" Jack yelled. "We're making our move." They had to make it out, alive, or risk becoming just another pile of bodies in this undead wasteland. The battle was far from over. And Sarah knew the hardest part was yet to come. Smoke drifted from the shattered windows of the store, and the stench of the fallen undead clung to the air like fog. The survivors stood in a loose circle outside the building, panting, bloodied, and bruised, but alive. Behind them, the store was now a silent grave for dozens of the undead. The escape had cost them dearly: injuries, exhaustion, and above all, time. Sarah leaned against a lamppost, clutching her side. Her shirt was torn, and blood seeped through the fabric, but she remained upright. She looked at the others, Ethan, Claire, Jack, Alex, and nodded to herself. They had done what most wouldn't dare. They had survived. Jack broke the silence first. "We can't stay here." That fight echoed through the whole block. "More will come." Ethan wiped the grime from his forehead. "Where do we go now? Everything around here is either crawling with infected or burned down." Claire, still gripping her blade tightly, pointed across the cracked pavement. "There's a fire escape that leads to the old radio station on the hill. It's been abandoned for years. Maybe we can get a signal out." Sarah's mind was already racing. "If we can reach the tower, we might still have a shot at contacting other survivors. If there's a chance of rallying more, if we can prove people are still fighting, then maybe we can organize something bigger. A real pushback." Jack gave her a look, tired, doubtful, but not hopeless. "You think there's anyone left to hear us?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. She glanced at the distant skyline, where smoke still curled above the city ruins like the dying breath of a civilization. Finally, she said, "We won't know until we try." They moved quickly, staying in the shadows, ducking through alleyways, avoiding open roads where the horde might spot them. The radio station loomed ahead, a tall, rusting structure perched on the edge of a hill. From afar, it looked abandoned. But as they approached, Alex froze. "Wait," he whispered. "Did you hear that?" The group paused. A faint scraping sound echoed from inside the building. Then another. It wasn't the sluggish shamble of undead, it was more deliberate. Calculated. "Someone's already inside," Jack muttered, lowering into a crouch. Sarah's pulse quickened. Could be another survivor, or worse. They circled to the side entrance, climbing through a broken window. Inside, dust coated every surface, and cobwebs clung to old radio equipment. The group crept through the silent rooms, weapons drawn. The hallway ahead was dark, but a flicker of light came from the broadcast room. Claire held her breath as Sarah pushed open the door. A figure turned sharply, a man, middle-aged, gaunt but alert, holding a rifle. "Who are you?" he barked. Sarah raised her hands. "We're survivors. We just fought our way through downtown. We're not infected." The man's eyes scanned them, then slowly lowered his weapon. "You're the first I've seen in weeks." Jack stepped forward. "Can you get the transmitter working?" The man nodded. "I've been trying. Got some of it powered. The tower still stands, but it needs a strong enough signal to cut through the interference." Sarah glanced at the old equipment. "Then let's do it. We don't have time. The Horde will be here soon." Together, they set to work. Sarah and the others cleared the lower floors, barricading doors and windows. The stranger, who introduced himself as Malcolm, tuned the transmitter with trembling fingers. Finally, the light on the panel blinked green. "It's ready," Malcolm said. "All yours." Sarah stepped up to the microphone. She hesitated, then pressed the button. "This is Sarah Brooks. We are survivors in the heart of dead America. We've held our ground. We've fought back. If you're out there, if you're hearing this, know that you are not alone. The undead took our homes, our families, our world, but they haven't taken everything. There's still hope. And we're still fighting." The message crackled into the airwaves, bouncing across the desolate land. They waited. Seconds passed. Then a voice, distant and broken, filtered through the speakers. "Copy that, hearing you, survivors in the north, hold your position." The room fell silent as the realization hit. They weren't alone. Sarah smiled faintly, tears threatening her eyes. For the first time in weeks, there was a future. Outside, the moans of the undead echoed once more in the distance, but this time, they didn't sound quite so unstoppable. Dead America still had survivors. And the battle for its future was just beginning. Would you like a short epilogue or visual prompt suggestion to accompany the ending?